Hello, hello, hello. Welcome or welcome back. Tisha here, back with another chapter reading for Lost Boy by Brent Williams with I don't know if she pronounces it Mia or Maya. I didn't even think about it till later on because that's how my sister spells her name and it's Maya. So, Maya Salovich, go ahead and do me a favor and hit the like button as we jump into this next chapter. Hopefully, StreamYard doesn't act up because I have to be off camera because I just had like the worst allergy attack. And yeah, I've been, blowing my nose here and there. And it's just better to do it up here because you don't have to be, hearing all of that. Anyways, let's begin with chapter 2, Weddings and War. Leroy Johnson's office was a lot like his style as a prophet, plain, folksy, not at all flashy. It was a small, converted bedroom with one little window located on the third floor of a turn of the century Salt Lake City home on Lincoln Street. The prophet sat in a swivel chair near a rolled top desk with a couch and some other chairs for visitors. His main home was in Colorado City, but after a 1953 raid on polygamists, church members had scattered to avoid further scrutiny. It was 1968, and my mom, Susan, had come to see Uncle Roy to present herself for marriage. In our church, the prophet is always called uncle as a term of respect and connection. To understand my story, you have to understand how marriage worked in the church at that time and my father's unique situation as the only one of Rulon's dozens of sons to serve in the Vietnam War. Susan was 18 that year, the year after the summer of love when hippies in New York and San Francisco were dropping acid and questioning authorities. But her concerns were far away from all of that. For her, authority was holy. She was deeply religious, having taken the precepts of faith that she was taught as a child straight to heart. Her green eyes were kind, and I'm sure she looked beautiful dressed in her Sunday best. She wore a long chaste dress, her luxuriant brown hair tucked up in a bun. Mom had been raised in a polygamous family in Salt Lake City with two sister mothers and nearly 2 dozen siblings. There hadn't been much noticeable strife between her moms. They lived in separate houses, and their father split his time between these two homes. For almost all of her childhood, Uncle Roy had been the prophet. He had ascended when Susan was just 4 years old. Mom had long dreamed of her wedding day and her entry into a celestial marriage. She was prepared for anything if her path was to be second, fourth, or 10th wife to an older man or first wife to a young one. It was up to God, and she understood and accepted that. Because she was programmed from an early age, he's saying that his mother accepted this. It goes to show you how quickly they begin working on these kids because their goal is to have them want to be a part of this faith, this cult. Via the prophet's revelations, she would discover God's will for her, and she was devoutly determined to be as obedient as she possibly could. Her life was focused on following the church's command to keep sweet. This meant submitting to its rules and leader, and through him, God not grudgingly, but happily. Mm. Susan had already had a good deal of practice at keeping sweet. Throughout her childhood, she always wanted to be a good girl and worked hard at it. Though she remembers that her sisters and brothers were whipped with a thin willow branch from time to time when they acted up, she was usually well behaved and doesn't even recall being spanked. Good for her, because I know I got some beatings. In her family, she was the oldest girl of her mom's 17 children. 17! Goodness gracious. Her father's second wife had 12. 7 of those children tragically suffered from a genetic disorder that runs in the FLDS called, fumarase deficiency. Am I saying that right? Fumarasa. Fumarase? think that's what it says, fumarate deficiency, and didn't live to adulthood. That is crazy. That is crazy. Like, it happened once and then again, and you don't think it may be something going on and that you should stop having these children intentionally and knowingly, that you guys are relatives and it's causing these abnormalities. Okay, let me keep reading. At the time, not much was known about it. Okay, never mind. Let me be quiet. And mom's parents didn't see it as genetic. The defect is caused by a problem with a chemical needed to give energy to the body and brain. Sadly, it's usually fatal in early childhood, stunting brain development and causing seizures and a wide range of disability. 3 children with fumarate deficiency were born to my blood grandmother. And so, in my mom's household, one brother with the disorder died at 5, a sister died at 7, and another brother lived until 15. My mom helped take care of them all, but especially the oldest boy. His bed was in her room until she left home to get married, and then some of her younger sisters took over his care. Mom's family saw these children as blessings from God, believing they had been sent from heaven so that the family could learn and grow by caring for them. Under Warren, children with this same birth defect would later be seen as a curse and a sign of sin. So you saying that this defect is a sign of sin, when really, if you're trying to be technical, the sin or the mistake, I'm going to call it, is that you had family members having relations with each other. Mm, 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 mm. But under Uncle Roy, mom's family didn't have to live with that added burden. And so, long before she became a mom herself, she was changing diapers, running the sick children's painfully undeveloped arms and legs, rubbing the sick children's painfully developed arms and legs, making sure they were breathing and feeding and otherwise caring for them. And this is why I have a problem, because it sounds to me like those children that were born with that disorder suffered. And that's not right. I don't like stuff like that. They were like babies who didn't grow up. They taught her compassion, mom says. And although the affected siblings couldn't walk or talk, they could laugh. Mom remembers them fondly for their beautiful eyes, curly eyelashes, and those smiles and laughter. Of course, caring for them was also a tremendous challenge and one that many adults couldn't manage. But by 18, mom was more prepared than most people will ever be for marriage and motherhood. At this point, Uncle Roy arranged all the marriages in the group. He had had a revelation in 1957 that this was the way it should be done. Prior to that, couples had carried on relatively ordinary courtships with chaste forms of dating. First wives often helped choose later wives for their husbands. But this method had begun causing problems, as multiple men would say that they had had revelations that they should marry the same woman. And young women always wanted to marry the younger men, not the church elders who were deemed worthy of multiple wives. Al- mm. Alternately, some men would barter daughters for business favors, having the prophet decide simplified matters. So the church my parents grew up in was very different from the one my grandfather and uncle would eventually head. Uncle Roy believed that living as an example, not mandating strict rules, was the best way to perfect the people in their quest to become godlike. He was much more of a people person than my grandfather. Trained as an accountant, grandfather tended to have different concerns. Uncle Roy was already in his 60s when my mom came to see him. Though he was nearly bald, with only a wispy ring of white hair, his skin was relatively unlined, and his riveting eyes retained a youthful spark throughout his life. His energy and devotion to the church were also unflagging. He sat in an old office chair with wheels and would spin around when he greeted people. Uncle Roy had a much more relaxed leadership style than our later prophets. He seems to have been beloved by nearly everyone in the FLDS, especially Mom. There was little doubt in that generation that he was a holy man. They felt he deeply cared about the people and arranged marriages with concern and with input from couples. His revelations were more advice than absolute commands. When a young woman felt she was ready to wed, she would present herself to him for consideration. So that explains why his mom didn't do this until she was 18. Because when he first said 18, I was like, oh, I'm surprised that they didn't try to do that younger. I get it now. Okay. A man couldn't do this. Although he might hint with increased ties and displays of piety that he was ready for a new wife, and this could be quite effective under some prophets, he couldn't ask directly. Only women could. And so, after welcoming her into his office, Uncle Roy asked gently if Mom had received a revelation about her future husband. When she said she had not, he told her to pray about it and come back. She was impressed by how kind and comforting Uncle Roy was with her and how he seemed to be filled with the Spirit of God. Do not tell me that this lady is. Okay, let me keep reading. Although she had never met my father, I was nervous that she was going to want to marry him, but okay. Although she had never met my father, Mom had seen him in church and at fireside gatherings. At these meetings, open only, to young singles over 15, church leaders would teach about marriage and Mormon theology. Then they'd give the young people time to socialize together over snacks. These socials, too, fell by the wayside under more controlling later prophets. Even under Uncle Roy's, boys and girls would mingle more than saying hi to each other. But the gatherings were an opportunity to get some sense of each other, at least in terms of manner and looks. Following her audience with the prophet, Susan prayed fervently. She asked God, am I worthy to have an impression of where you would have me go? Can you impress upon my mind what is right? And over time, she found that her prayers were answered with the image of the man who would become my father. As she prayed, the 6'10", well-built giant of a man with dark brown hair and twinkly brown eyes kept appearing to her. She wasn't driven by a sense of desire or attraction to him. She told me she just a feeling that God wanted her to be his wife. She knew that he was a year younger than she was, which felt strange because at that age it seems like a big difference. Still, his was the repeated image that she saw. She kept these thoughts to herself, however, not telling a soul, not even her sisters and Mom. And when she was 21 in 1971, fearing she would become an old maid, at 21, this lady was worried she was going to become an old maid. Fearing that she was going to become an old maid, she went back to the prophet. This time she said she had indeed had an impression about her husband to be. Do you want me to tell you who it is? She asked him. Uncle Roy agreed. Softly, Mom said, Ward Jeffs. My mother recalls the next few moments vividly. Uncle Roy had piercing, almost black eyes, and he looked directly at her. You know, I've been thinking the same thing for some time now, he said. Oh my goodness, Mom replied, embarrassed, excited, and nervous all at once. When she got home, her mother said that she had the same vision, but Dad at the time was serving in Vietnam, so the wedding would have to wait for his return. My father isn't sure how many brothers he has. He knows that he has his father's fourth son and eighth or ninth child. He knows that his father has around 6 dozen kids. However, because grandfather kept taking younger wives and having more children, even some of who are the same age as me and my brothers, Dad had a hard time keeping track. He thinks he has at least 20 brothers, and he thinks his father had many more daughters and sons. At least that was true among the kids that Dad grew up with, but he doesn't know for sure that he was the only one who was but he does know for sure that he was the only one that was drafted to serve in Vietnam. It was his age and his low draft number, 158, that got him. His only other brother eligible during the waning years of war lucked out with a high number. The others were spared by the American withdrawal. Like my mom, Dad grew up in polygamy with his father's wives living in separate houses. During Dad's childhood, Rulon had 7 wives, so my dad saw his father only once a week for dinner. Even on those nights, he wasn't very involved as a father. Dad remembers him coming home so late most times that the kids had already eaten dinner and were off to watch TV or doing homework. Uncle Roy didn't restrict media exposure. He trusted families to protect themselves against morality. I was about to say, so they got to watch TV? Because we know later days they can't even read certain books and all that other stuff. They even took the toys from the kids. Grandfather's accountancy practice was very busy and successful, which was what kept him so late. He also founded and served on the boards of several multi-million-dollar companies, most infamously Hydrapak, the company that made the O-ring that failed and blew up the space shuttle in 1986. Oh boy, was that the Challenger? Y'all tell me down below in the comments. Can't remember. My grandmother LaRue would eat with her husband, who would then read the newspaper or study scripture. She was Rulon's second wife, ranking high in the hierarchy of grandfather's women because she was the one he married legally. But she was not the queen bee or favorite. That position was held by Warren's mother, Marilyn. This fact would figure largely in our lives later. As Dad tells it, Rulon was not the kind of father who changed diapers or rolled around on the floor with the kids. In fact, he would only occasionally discipline his children. Usually, that too was left to moms. But every Sunday, all the wives and children would gather at Mother LaRue's farmhouse, which was situated on about 5 acres of land. The boys would play football, basketball, or tetherball, and sometimes even Rulon would join in. Dad recalls growing up on the farm fondly, though he will admit when pressed that there were lots of chores that he didn't always want to do. Dad reported for military duty on March 19th, 1971. Although gone to public school, he had kept to himself there mainly strictly with kids from the church. In basic training in California, he had his first real experience of interacting with people outside of the church, including African Americans. The FLDS, following the lead of the early Mormon church, preaches that dark skinned people carry the mark of Cain and are satanic as a result. This is one of the reasons that I have often had problems with Mormons because of my encounters with them. Some of them don't follow this still, but some of them really do still feel like this is a thing. And as a result of it, I kind of am a little like leery of them, even though, most of the Mormons that I have met do seem like kind people. Knowing that this is a part of their doctrine bothers me. I'm just being honest. The ugly racism was conveyed through countless sermons by church leaders in school and in church literature. My father, while not wholly buying it, was consequently not comfortable around people of other races, to say the least. He knew little about them and had had virtually no exposure to other cultures and people. By August, he was in Vietnam. I'm sure that gave him another shock. He was in Vietnam with men from all over America, facing fire. The time he spent in the infantry marked him profoundly. As he puts it, I grew up in a cloistered cloistered society in religion, But in the military, I was exposed to anything and everything that the real world could offer. I discovered that there's good people out there. There's people I don't want to hang out with. There's every manner of people. I had to learn that regardless of race, even as I was covering another soldier's back in combat, he was covering my back. Yeah. He describes his army experience this way. You had the enemy on one hillside, and in your mind, they were going to take you down with a rifle any second. You had the enemy ground mines implanted in the ground, string mines. Your enemy was leeches in the swamps and malaria, so you had to take pills. Your enemy was the typhoon that beheaded one of your buddies with the tin roof that comes flying off a building, and one of my buddies dropped dead there in front of me. And the next day, another buddy goes down to a red coral snake bite, and you take over his mortar barrel and you go on and on another mission. Your lieutenant, who is dedicated all to hell to take care of his guys, is blown apart and dies in your arms. You're looking at panic. There's nothing worse. To have a comrade in your arms breathing his last breath and going from consciousness with panic to God. Gray, blank. You help his eyes close, and that is horrifying. His voice fills with emotion, his eyes with tears as he tells me the rest of the story. And there it is. In 1972, the Vietnam War had dragged on for 11 years, and you're going, my God, this man did not have to give his life. This war could have ended 5 years before. He didn't have to die in my arms. And so I learned what life is like in combat, and I found out how fragile life is. Dad brought those lessons home with him, and he says that they helped him to make the right decision when years later he had to choose between his family and his church. Unfortunately, he also brought home another legacy: post traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, which would affect his interactions with his family for many years. After going through the things that our military goes through, I get very upset by the way some of them do not receive the proper health and proper services. And this is coming from someone whose parents are not from this country, whose father has served for many, many years, and who saw firsthand what this does to families. So I'm hearing this and I'm thinking about all the many families who have been forever changed because of war. Let me continue reading. But unlike FLDS members whose only experience of outsiders was limited to brief transactions, my father knew that out in the world there were many decent, honorable people. When his tour of duty was up, Dad had no idea what was going on back home. The other soldiers must have thought he was some kind of celebrity given the swarming entourage of people who greeted him at the airport. His father, a dozen of his wives, and numerous brothers and sisters were all at the gate, waiting to greet the young man they now saw as a hero. Warren was almost certainly among them. Unlike many who served, Dad wasn't neglected or ignored by family and friends because of the diverse politics of the war. He was vibrantly welcomed, but he knew something more than an homecoming celebration was planned when he was told to ride along with his mother and father in their Lincoln Continental rather than with the rest of his siblings. I guess you're wondering why you're here with me and your mother and not in the big van, Rulin said. Yeah, that thought had occurred to me, my dad quipped. Well, the Lord has a wife appointed for you, and I have been asked to orchestrate your wedding when you're ready, my grandfather told him. And as he tells it, my grandfather thought, I'm just getting home from Vietnam. And, excuse me, I said my grandfather. My father thought, I'm just getting home from Vietnam and somebody's going to throw a wedding at me? Exactly. You don't even know what the war has done to him. You don't even know if he's adjusted. And here you are. Time for you to get married, son, but just let me know when you're ready. Okay. I'm just getting used to seeing round eyed girls again. It was quite it was quiet for a moment, and my grandfather said in a soft voice, "I suppose you're wondering who." Then Rulon asked if Dad knew who a certain church elder was, and my father did. In church, boys aren't supposed to check out girls, but of course everyone does. He knew the family by sight. It's his oldest daughter, Sarah. I mean, it's his oldest daughter, Suzanne. Excuse me, you guys. She's quite a gem. My father remembers his father's exact words, and Dad inwardly sighed in relief, thinking, yes, because he remembered that all the daughters in the family were very beautiful. As my father tells it, both men and women dreaded being assigned someone, I cannot talk today, dreaded being assigned someone fat or ugly because of the prohibition against rejecting a blessing. Oh, really? During my dad's last 8 months in combat, my mom's mother sewed her wedding clothes. Her outfit was very simple: a white A-line skirt, a lavender blouse, and a white scoop neck vest with gold buttons down the center. Her hair was rolled into a bun with the traditional FLDS wave in the front, though it was not as large and pronounced as it is now. This is achieved with bobby pins and a product called Wave Set. Mom would later learn to use flaxseed oil, a special Jess family recipe for this purpose. There was no problem with fitting a veil in the FLDS. Brides do not wear veils. The only members of Mom's family who attended were her mother and father. A larger contingent from Dad's family was there. The ceremony was conducted in the meeting hall of the building that later became Alta Academy. At that time, Grandfather Rulon lived there with some 19 wives and dozens of children. Grandfather performed this ceremony, sealing my mom and father's union for time and eternity. My father had been home from war for a week. When they drank champagne to celebrate, it was the first time he'd ever tasted it. The FLDS has much more relaxed attitude towards intoxicants than the mainstream church. It views the words of wisdom. Mormons take as a blanket prohibition on alcohol, caffeine, and other intoxicants as more of a suggestion. Early in Mormon history, Joseph Smith had embraced alcohol, even running a bar at the hotel he owned. So there is possible fundamentalist theological argument for this stance. On their wedding night, however, my parents shared nothing more than a bed. My mother had no sex education, let alone experience, and my father took things very slowly. He was a virgin himself. During the war, he had ample opportunity to drink, take drugs, and womanize, but the only thing he'd ever tried was one beer, and that was because he felt obliged to a buddy. Like my mom, he felt strongly about his religious ideals and values, and in the army, he had also come to cherish the values of an honorable warrior. He told my mom stories and courted her and charmed her. Dad laughs when telling how he sometimes been called a silver-tongued devil for his ability to persuade people to do what he wanted. But in this case, his cause was righteous. Over the next few weeks, my parents fell in love. Oh, they actually loved each other. That's good. Dad had to finish out his tour at an armory base in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And it was in their 5 months there that they really got to know each other. That was one of the few times that they were both away from their families, living in military housing like any other young couple. Within 2 months, my mom was pregnant with my oldest brother, Clane. Growing up with two moms who had dozens of pregnancies, she knew the signs well and did not need a test to confirm it. She and Dad began making a life together, having children each year between 1973 and 1976. Chapter 3: The Plurality of Wives. Dad's second wife Dad's second and third marriages were also arranged by Uncle Roy. In 1978, 5 years before I was born, my father was summoned to the prophet's office. Devout and in good standing, Dad was not at all apprehensive about being called in to see him. He didn't know how much his life was about to change. When he got settled, Uncle Roy asked my dad if he was totally committed to the church. He said that he was. He asked Dad if he felt he truly loved his wife. My father confirmed this too. By now, Dad was getting very curious about what was going on. The prophet inquired once again about whether Dad genuinely and without reservation saw himself living in the FLDS forever. Dad asserted his commitment, a tiny bit impatient now. Then, if that's the case, there's a young gal who I feel is right for you. In the plurality of wives, Uncle Roy said, do you feel ready? Not one to shrink from a challenge or to turn down a family blessing, my father said yes, if you think I'm ready. Then Uncle Roy told him that the woman in question was one of Mom's sisters. Oh, goodness. Here they go. Here they go with this. We're not only sisters, but we're married to the same husband mess. Let me keep going. Felicia was about to turn 21. She was much younger than Mom. She was vivacious, seductive, and beautiful, a brunette with full lips like her sister. But while Suzanne's face is round, her sister's is more angular, almost feline. Dad knew her from visits to his in-laws. In retrospect, he believes Felicia had developed feelings for him during these visits. Other family members sensed that she was flirting with him, but Dad had kept an appropriate distance, and no one thought he had done anything untoward. At the time, he saw her as just one of a flock of sister-in-laws. From what I could see growing up, Dad's second wife was never as devoted to the FLDS as her sister. In fact, when my family was later excommunicated, Mom cried while Felicia cheered. His family was excommunicated. Interesting. Guess maybe his uncle felt like his dad was competition. We'll see. When she was in her early 20s, however, Felicia apparently saw Dad as a tall, handsome man who she wanted to wed. Like Mom, she presented herself for marriage and told the prophet that Dad had appeared to her when she prayed for a vision of her husband to be. Uncle Roy placed her with us. Proponents of polygamy often argue that when two women want the same man, if he can marry both of them, this will prevent divorce as a consequence of adultery. They claim that this is much better for any kids involved, as they will have a father who is very much in their lives. Polygamy supporters say that as a result, conflict and jealousy are actually reduced. They also claim that the sisters are typically better suited to being sister wives than unrelated women. I don't know how I feel about that. I don't know. I don't think, first of all, I wouldn't be able to do this at all. But I know for a fact that I would never be able to share my man with my sister. It's a no for me. Any woman, but my sister, oh no. Neither position gets any support whatsoever from what went on in my family. When my dad married his second wife, my mother was nursing an infant, my brother David. He was 5 months old. My father's oldest son, Clay, was 5, Don was 4, Sarah was 3, and Aaron was 2. Since Mom's wedding, there had only been 1 year when she wasn't pregnant, and she already had 4 boys and a little girl under school age. Clay alone was already a handful. He was fearless, and Mom actually dressed him in red so she could spot him quickly and minimize trouble. Oh, that's smart. Mom was initially excited to learn that the family would enter into the principle. She believed in celestial marriage. She thought she was ready for it. But when she heard who the second wife would be, she gulped a few times and prayed for strength. It was that thing about rejecting blessings. Those who do so are damned, according to the church. Mom felt she had to be obedient and keep sweet, even as she panicked. During the first few months leading up to the wedding, she was filled with apprehension despite her prayers. Even during childhood, Mom and Felicia had not gotten along. You see, this is the problem. This is what doesn't make sense. So there's sisters that don't get along, and her sister sees this man, wants this man, and can say, "Oh, I got a vision. I'm supposed to marry this man." And because these people just do whatever they want, it happens. And her mom has to suffer. My family then lived in Uncle Alan's basement next door to the house where I would grow up. Dad's second wedding was held right there, with my grandfather officiating as he'd done for my father's first marriage. Because of their uh, because of their illegal I'm going to say it, y'all. Illegality. Polygamous weddings are low-key events with no party or reception. Other than her sister, only the bride's blood mother and father attend the wedding, which was quite brief and somber. According to our tradition, during the ceremony, Mom placed her husband's hand into that of her sister, welcoming her as her sister wife, even saying, "I do." I don't know how she did it. I don't know how any of them do it. I think it's sad that these women have to go through this. After a short honeymoon with Dad, Felicia moved into one of the two bedrooms our family occupied in Alan's basement. The children were given a third bedroom, all five of them, including baby David. To make matters worse for my mom, the walls were thin and her bedroom was adjacent to her sister's. Now that sucks. I don't understand why that's a thing. That's part of the reason why Christine Brown suffers so much, because of thin walls. And here you are, out of the rooms in this basement, you put these two rooms beside one another. Dad would alternate nights between them. It's hard for Mom to even talk about how badly that tore her up inside and how she had to contain her feelings, believing that this was God's will, because they're taught that, they gain favor through this suffering. It just doesn't make sense. Let's continue. Suzanne accepted that her sister wanted children too, and that she wanted a husband who loved her. She wanted those things herself. It was only natural. But the pain that this caused still echoes through our family today. For my father, although he was excited to get a new wife and attracted to this beautiful younger woman, the transition from monogamy to polygamy was not as pleasant as it might seem. He tried to be respectful of Mom's feelings, spending their nights together, reassuring her how much he still loved her, alternating nights between his love of his his love of 6 years and the intensity of his new attraction to his second wife took an emotional toll. However, he almost couldn't avoid becoming somewhat insensitive, just dealing with so many competing demands. Dad regrets not realizing then how much it hurt Mom. He was exhausted just answering her pleas, coping with jealousy, wiping away tears, all the while falling in love with the younger sister and trying to keep his own emotions in check. And that's the problem. They get frustrated with the woman's natural emotions because she's heartbroken, because she's having to share her husband. Meanwhile, this is nothing that they ever have to deal with because they don't have to share their wives. The dynamic was complicated and difficult, and made even more so by the fact that no one was supposed to be having feelings he or she had. It was just supposed to be a blessing for all of them, not a trial. I think the truth is, if we were to talk to a lot of people who were in polygamous relationships, because I do understand that it works for some people, but in these cults where they're told that they should be in it because it will get them into a celestial kingdom, I don't believe that we would find many women who didn't struggle with this. We've seen it in every book that we've read that this has been a struggle for these women. And everyone was supposed to keep sweet. and not express any misgivings or even strong positive emotions because that was the way to salvation. There was another reason, too, that my father hadn't expected having a second wife to be as hard as it was. His own experience growing up in polygamy had been very different. Dad had foreseen a lot of responsibility. Obviously, running a large household would take a great deal of energy and work, but he hadn't realized how many conflicts and conflicting emotions there would be for the patriarch. Crucially, until my father was 18, my grandfather's wives had lived in separate homes. This had made living the principal much less emotionally challenging. Each of his wives had her own space. She could run her home however she liked, without interference from other women with different tastes and styles. She could make her own choices about child rearing and disciplinary practices. Further, no woman risked hearing or catching glimpses of her husband's intimacy with his other wives. A plural wife didn't have to think about about what he was up to when he wasn't with her. There weren't so many reminders around. Everyone seems to agree that this was easier for all involved, which is why when you think about the Browns, and I know they have nothing to do with this, but with Sister Wives, the Brown family, a lot of those women, even though Cody put it all on Christine, a lot of those women did not want to be back in one home for this very reason. But in 1967 or 1968, Uncle Roy decided that we should no longer hide our polygamy, that we should be in the world. He had long preached that the holiest way to live polygamy was to gather all the wives and kids together and live under one roof. Living together wasn't practical if you were trying to keep a polygamous lifestyle secret. However, I guess with the rest of the sexual revolution going on at that time, Uncle Roy figured that there wasn't much risk that polygamists would be prosecuted. It wouldn't be risky to live openly in plural families. Church members began making preparations. At around the same time, a woman who had left the FLDS returned after hearing her wealthy husband died. She had inherited millions of dollars from him. She didn't want to grow old alone outside of the religious community she loved. She wanted to give her money to the church and join a plural family. What? Uncle Roy placed her with Rulon. They used the money to buy the land for the 5-acre compound where I grew up in Sandy, an affluent suburb of Salt Lake. About 1/3 of the FLDS people lived in around Salt Lake City at the same time. Although Dad spent 8 months in his late teens living on the compound in his father's home before starting his military service, and did experience some resulting clashes among his moms, the tension was mostly hidden. Facing combat meant he had a lot of other things on his mind, and on the surface, everyone seemed to get along. But behind closed doors, the women were quietly and sometimes not so quietly going crazy. Still, before his family moved into the huge new house, polygamy seemed much more harmonious. So when Dad's second wife joined our family, my father was blindsided by the difficulties of trying to manage his own relationship with such contrasting women and the constant problem of mediating the sisters' increasingly antagonistic relationship with each other. While Mom was quiet and accepting, her sister was bold and demanding. While Susan was devout, her sister liked to skirt the rules. Mom was calm and steady, her sister stormy and high strung. Typically preferring to stay in the background, Mom was pushed further and further back by her sister's desire for a star turn. Sometimes it seemed like they were having a fertility contest. As soon as one would get pregnant, the other would report her own good news. In 1979, 1981, and 1983, the year I was born, each sister gave birth. Like the rest of their personalities, their mothering styles were a study in contrast. Mom was patient and nurturing, believing in explaining why a child had to do what he was told and in using timeouts and other non physical forms of discipline. Dad's second wife took a more of a spare the rod, spoil the child approach and would react with sudden anger to childish behavior that got on her nerves. This conflict was responsible for the majority of the day to day disputes. Then in September 1983, when I was 9 months old, my parents got a new summons to meet with Uncle Roy. Mom and Dad had been away on a short vacation. He would alternate taking trips with his wives, though Felicia somehow always seemed to get the extra excursions. See, this is what happens a lot of times. The first wives end up getting treated like crap when you get the new little shiny penny in front of you. I'll keep reading. This time around, however, Felicia was the one left home. When she answered the phone and found out that my father had been selected to get another wife, she freaked out. My parents cut short their trip. Mom and Dad rushed home to meet with Roy. After the usual preliminaries, the prophet asked, "Are you ready to have a quorum?" That's what they call having 3 wives, the minimum needed to attain the celestial realm of heaven. As the first wife, my mom was to be part of the decision, although in reality it wasn't much of one because, wait for it, no one wanted to be the person who turned down the blessing. Which goes back to all that information he gave us in chapter 1, that if you turn down a blessing, it's basically saying you'll be damned. So, of course, she's going to be like, yeah, okay, let's do it. In his office, Uncle Roy introduced them to a 16-year-old girl. 16, you guys. A 16-year-old girl named Vera, who was sitting with her mother. The mom's husband had died years before, and Uncle Roy had married her, helping support her family. At the time, Vera was slender, with long curly red hair and brown eyes. She wore large round glasses. This was not considered an underage marriage. In Utah, she was of legal age to marry with the permission of her parents, which she had. You should be ashamed of yourself for okaying this type of situation, Utah, and other states that do this. It's not right. It's not in my opinion. There's a lot of growing up that has to be done. Let me continue. And unlike many of the marriages of teenage girls that would occur under Warren, this union occurred at the girl's request. Vera did not get along well with her mom, and she saw marriage as a way to leave home. Outside our community, a girl in her situation might have had other options, but in our world, this seemed like the best way. Besides, she was eager to join the adult world in the church. A few months before the marriage announcement, my father later realized they had checked our family out. Of course they did, because why out of everybody are they choosing you guys? After church one snowy day, Vera, her mother, and a few of her sisters and brothers had knocked on our door, seeking help with the stalled car. It made no sense for them to come to us. Both of my uncle's houses were nearer to the church parking lot, but there they were. My father went to fix their car while they watched my 2 moms bustle about preparing for Sunday dinner and caring for us kids. I guess our family passed the test. Dad's third wife turned out to be shy, naive, trusting, and vulnerable. She had a very idealized conception of plural marriage and of what having adult responsibilities would be like. She didn't expect the rivalries and adjustments that were involved, because they do not really prepare these women for what they're about to face. Sounds like they don't prepare the men or the women for it. They just throw them in it. I have no idea why Vera had such rosy expectations, because her own home life was apparently far from pleasant. But whatever her original reasons were for wanting to marry, she must have quickly realized that living with a strict mother might have been easier than being a third wife in a home with 11 kids under 11. Still, her bed had been made. Now my father had an even more complicated balancing act to manage. As with his other wives, he was not immediately intimate with his third. In fact, he saw utter terror in her eyes on their wedding night. Very gently he held her hand, said welcome to our family, and went to sleep. He was very cautious. It was over a year before Vera became pregnant with her first daughter, who was born the same year as Felicia's fourth child, Miriam, in 1985. In contrast to my dad's approach, some polygamists, such as Warren, seem to get off on a virgin's fear of sex. They use this not only for their own sick, selfish pleasure, but to dominate and control their wives. In the church, sex is supposed to be for reproduction, not for pleasure. The acts that are officially permitted are only those that result in pregnancy. As a result, many men don't feel moved to satisfy their wives sexually. In other words, they're saying that this is just because you want to create children, but the guys aren't even trying to satisfy their women, meaning a lot of times the women don't even get to enjoy it. Without pleasure, sex for those women is just another obligation and often a source of fear and shame. Using birth control is a sin, even if the women are tired out from previous pregnancies and the family can't afford to feed another child. FLDS men also tend to want to impregnate newer, younger wives as quickly as possible to bind them to the family. Before a young girl has children, it's a lot easier for her to run away or just go back home to her family. Of course, my father wasn't without lust or desire for his new teenage wife, but he preferred to wait and build an emotional bond as a basis for marriage rather than breaking her in. I hear what he's saying because it was a year till she got pregnant, but the fact remains that she was only 16 when his father was with her. And I don't know how old his father was at the time, but that's still disgusting to me. Just my opinion. Tell me yours. That was the phrase some men in the church used about what to do with a new young wife. There were also issues at the other end of reproductive life because sex was only for having babies. After menopause, it was no longer permitted. I never thought about that. Oh, excuse me. Oh my goodness. I never thought about that. After menopause, they can't have relations? Women feared this as they got older. They called it being put out to pasture. It still upsets me the way many FLDS men saw women as animals to be used up and worn out by childbearing and rearing. Another example was the fact that at age 14, when a boy typically receives a Aaronic, Aaronic priesthood, and joins the lowest level of the church's hierarchy, his opinion is seen as more valuable than that of any woman, even his mother, just because he joined the priesthood and he's 14. They don't look at women as beings. They look at them as people that are supposed to birth for their kingdom. It's crazy. Only men could hold the priesthood and receive revelations from God. With regard to women, the world I grew up in has more in common with that of Osama bin Laden than with the beliefs of most 21st century Americans. And that is where we're going to end it for today. You guys, let me know what you thought of this reading. I still haven't gotten his flow down. Normally I catch like the flow of how, people are writing their words, but I'll get it soon. Thank you guys so much for your time. Until next time, peace.